We are delighted that you are joining us in the Vital Conversations movement, dealing with issues related to faith, culture, and fighting oppression in the church and world today. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Lisa Faulkner, who will be talking about the church's role in helping to address tribal conflict in Northern Ireland. Lisa has been responsible for leading several action research projects within areas such as racism, sectarianism, and homophobia. These included examining the motivations for participating in hate crimes, the needs of victims, and the state and community responses to such crimes. Dr. Faulkner has also facilitated several workshops and international site visits with individuals from various religious backgrounds to consider the role of reconciliation in building a more cohesive and shared society. Underpinning her approach has been a recognition of the tribal nature of community relations and the importance of identity, culture, and heritage in attempting to heal centuries-old divisions and animosities. Currently, Dr. Faulkner is employed in a conflict transformation initiative which supports former Loyalist combatants in the post-ceasefire era of Ireland, encouraging them to embrace new, positive leadership roles in their local communities. We invite you to stay connected with GCOR by following us on Facebook and Twitter, and by visiting our website to learn more about our work and to find resources to assist you in having your own vital conversations. And now, it is my very distinct pleasure to present to you Dr. Lisa Faulkner.
Hi, my name is Lisa Faulkner, and I'm delighted to be here today to share in this discussion about reconciliation. In preparation for coming here, I spoke with a number of academics and religious leaders about reconciliation. And to be honest, it totally confused me, causing me to delete far too many versions of this talk to mention. What I did learn, however, is that we could discuss this topic for weeks on end without ever reaching an agreement on what it is that we as individuals, as tribes, or as a society are moving towards. And I say this as even 20 years into a peace process in my native Northern Ireland, we have yet to achieve peace of mind. On this basis, I would like to share some of my own views and experiences of living in a divided society where I now work with others as they make their own move towards reconciliation. For me, reconciliation is a journey which is as unique and as individual as the person who embarks upon it. It is about bringing strangers or people from opposing tribes together to explore their mutual fear and anger and to work towards finding a common ground. Yet in order to do this, people must be prepared to walk in the shoes of others. They must be prepared to leave the safety and the single narrative of their own tribe to one side so that they can see the world through a different lens, through the lens of the outsider, the enemy, or the sinner. In Northern Ireland, many sections of our society still find it difficult to reach across tribal lines or to walk in the shoes of others, as we are still struggling to address the legacy of a protracted violent conflict which claimed around 3,700 lives and wounded thousands more. Whilst the roots of this ethno-nationalist conflict are centuries old, a key issue in recent times has been the constitutional status of Northern Ireland. So on one hand, we have the Protestants, also known as Unionists or Loyalists, who want Northern Ireland to remain part of the United Kingdom. And on the other hand, we have Catholics, also known as Nationalists or Republicans, who desire a united Ireland. In that respect, the conflict is often regarded as being religious in nature. Yet religion has acted more as a social marker by which each tribe could identify. In fact, it is this social marker, not theological issues, which continues to divide us. As even though the Good Friday Agreement in 1998 brought an end to the armed conflict, more so-called peace walls have been erected to separate Catholic and Protestant communities. Only 6% of our children are educated in integrated schools, and more than 97% of social housing, or low-income housing projects, as they are known here in the United States, are segregated along religious lines in Belfast. Now, the role of religion, or rather the role of the churches in general, during the conflict, was to condemn an end to the violence. However, there were individual clergy from across the churches who went further and walked in the shoes of others by speaking directly to those involved in the conflict, not to condone their actions, but to find out what it would take for them to go in a different way. Among them was the Methodist president Harold Good, a recipient of the Methodist World Peace Prize, who became a witness to the Irish Republican Army's Arms Decommissioning. Harold told me that to walk in somebody else's shoes can be very uncomfortable, especially when it takes us in a new and unfamiliar direction. I grew up in a working class Protestant neighbourhood in Belfast, beside one of these so-called peace walls, which are similar to the Berlin Wall in many respects. It was within such communities where the conflict was largely concentrated and where the poverty and disadvantage within them acted as a breeding ground for paramilitary recruitment. In many ways, there were very little opportunities to walk in the shoes of others, as from an early age I was aware that there were two tribes, and in many respects I was conditioned by my environment into a life of us and them, us being my Protestant family and neighbours, and them being the Catholics at the other side of the wall. They were the outsiders, the enemy. On reflection, every aspect of my life was shaped by my religion. As I socialised within my own community, I attended a Protestant school within my own community, and I celebrated my Protestant culture with my own kind. My single identity community was my safe, familiar ground. Yet the irony is that I never had any formal connection with religion, in the sense that I very rarely attended a Protestant church, as I thought it was irrelevant to my life and more suited to the middle classes. Although I personally wasn't at war with anyone, I would say that my own personal journey began when I realised that I had to stop viewing my side as being right and the Catholic Republican community as being wrong. In many ways, I found a space and willingness to do this when I went to university, where I then developed meaningful relationships with those I had regarded as the other for so long. This is also where I met the man I married, a man who just happens to be a Catholic. In my professional life, I have had the privilege and the frustration of working with many individuals as they begin their own move towards reconciliation. I currently work for a non-profit organisation that supports former Loyalist combatants and ex-political prisoners in their transition to peace and reconciliation, the majority of whom are male. A large part of this work is to bring together former members of paramilitary groups from both sides of the conflict to take part in uncomfortable conversations about the past and the best way forward for the future. It is easy to think that the perpetrators of the conflict would be the last ones who would want to move towards reconciliation. However, in my experience, this couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, I would say that many of these men have moved closer to reconciliation than others who weren't directly linked to the conflict. Before working in the field of conflict transformation, I often wondered how former combatants could sit in rooms with their enemy. Yet it soon became clear to me that they do so quite simply as they know more than most that reconciliation matters, and that the consequences of not reconciling can be enormous. Although each situation is different and has its own challenges, I would say that there are three basic principles which can be applied beyond the Northern Ireland context when helping people to move towards reconciliation. Firstly, people, groups or tribes must be comfortable with their own identity, culture and beliefs, as they are unlikely to step into the shoes of others if they feel that the things which define them are being eroded or attacked. Secondly, along with honouring tribal differences, we must also seek to uncover the things that unite us rather than divide us, as living within the confines of a single narrative can have serious implications for society, most notably as it can offer a rationale for a younger generation to become radicalised. And finally, I would say that tribal reconciliation requires the Church and other agents who promote positive social change to create safe, neutral spaces in which to promote dialogue between different or opposing tribes. This is about taking people away from their familiar ground and steering them in a different direction. I often find that within these safe spaces, people, whether former combatants or not, often find a common ground about the fact that poverty and unemployment can affect us all, regardless of our religion. They even develop an understanding of each other's views and beliefs. However, upon leaving these spaces, people tend to go back to their separate communities and their separate lives. And as such, it is hard to know if genuine relationships built on mutual trust and empathy have been formed or will be sustained. This raises more questions for me than answers. And I suppose the main question for me tends to be, is this reconciliation? Is this what it looks like? Is it simply enough for people to have an understanding of the other? Can we measure or define genuine relationships? These are questions that I will have to answer for myself, and ones that you may also have to consider as you help others on their journey toward true peace, justice and reconciliation, especially in communities torn apart by segregation, mistrust and historic conflicts. Reconciliation is about people and their willingness to engage with those who, for whatever reason, they deem as the enemy, the outsider, the sinner, or them. It is about overcoming the challenges of making strangers into friends. It is about encouraging and supporting people on that journey by helping them to feel comfortable about who they are and by helping them feel comfortable with those they don't yet know. I cannot tell you where reconciliation should start or end, or what it should look like within your own society or church. What I can tell you, however, is that I will continue to move people toward reconciliation, whatever that may mean for them, because the costs of not seeking reconciliation and justice are just too great.